this afternoon. So first, let me introduce our two speakers today. So Brian Sampson, he's the president at Ingage Partners. So he was recently appointed the president of Ingage Partners. Brian brings over 3 decades of IT and management consulting experience. Brian has played a pivotal role in numerous consulting engagements to assist organizational leaders in making strategic build versus buy decisions. He has successfully led the implementation of purchased enterprise products and played crucial roles in every phase of the development lifecycle for custom-built solutions. And then Matt Darple. Matt is a seasoned business and IT professional with over 30 years of experience, including 18 years of broad-based senior level management in software development, implementation, operations, and support. Matt excels at strategically and cost effectively utilizing technology to achieve business goals. He has successfully worked with clients on large scale, high profile initiatives, project management, building high performance teams, application crisis management, and strategic planning. So welcome everyone who has just recently joined. I will turn it over to Matt at this time.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. So you joined to hear us talk about build versus buy. That is the question. And I guess I just want to start out with a little context. So historically, back when I started in software over 30 years ago, hard to believe, back in the old days, it seems like there was always, you were always in a build shop or a buy shop. There was a much greater division between, a company's identity or a group's identity around building software. And so a lot of times you would hear, well, we're a build shop. And then you might be in some organizations where the leadership or, the decision-making was more, well, we want to buy something. We'd rather buy something than build it ourselves. And so there were these philosophies out there that were pretty prevalent at the time. Since then, obviously, things have changed very dramatically. And there are so many more software solutions available in the marketplace. Even in the past, 20 years, from 30 to 20 years ago, software solutions became prevalent, like ERP systems that would do everything for you, right? Wholesale, business in a box kinds of solutions. Getting to today where you have software as a service, you have everything as a service, right? Infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service. And all these cloud technologies are pretty mature at this point. So we see a huge number of software products being developed and available in the marketplace to serve almost any business need. So you have this continuum now where you could build software, but you could also buy it, and almost anything in between, where you are integrating things that you've purchased, things that you've built, and at different levels. And so it's really very much of a continuum. It's not a black and white question. So with the prevalence of all of these software solutions, I found myself, as Brian and I were talking about this before before the session, was just thinking about, well, with so much out there to choose from and so many mature cloud-based technologies, and is it always best to just buy? Shouldn't our default position be buy and figure it out from there? So that's my first question. I'm going to pose over to Brian, let him take it from here.
So thanks, Matt. First of all, the intro, that made me feel really old. And I am so glad that your number of years of service is higher than mine just by a tad. Really supportive of that. Even though I think I may have rounded down and you may have rounded up. Yeah, should we always just buy and not build? And you're asking that from somebody who grew up as a custom software developer. That obviously rubs me wrong. But God, because for the longest time, we kind of custom software developers made fun of products that couldn't do everything. They're like, oh, I can't do that. And like, what do you mean you can't do it? Either you're not good enough, your product's not good enough. Which one is it? Let me go ahead and solve this, the business problem for you. And that was fun, and that was arrogant and really great back in the day. But to be honest, damn, these products are pretty good these days. There's more and more of them. I don't even know what I'm completely disoriented about what the future is going to hold with all the generative AI and everything, but the products are good. So I'm going to come back to your initial question. Should you just always buy and not build? Just always default to that? I'm thinking back I'm going to actually use a company that one of our sister organizations, Revision Collective, is our holding company, and we also our sister company, 5-Star, works with a well-known fast food company. I'm not going to say their name, but they are known for their very fast, very consistent customer experience and customer engagement. They decided to build, instead of buy, of all things, a learning management system, an LMS. Why would somebody build an LMS, right? Why would you get there? Well, their differentiating factor, their secret sauce, they have a secret sauce, but their secret sauce is known for that consistent customer engagement. They need a tool and a system that follows a very deliberate process. They want to ensure that whatever tool they have follows their business process and not vice versa. And that LMS is key to that differentiation. That's their strategy. It's built all around the LMS. And so they custom built it to hit every business need. So it really comes down to, is this need strategic or not, right? Number one question. Oh, it's strategic. Absolutely strategic. Everything seems to be strategic these days. Well, what's the difference between strategic and unique? A strategic idea might be, a specific patented idea, something that that you are it's very different than other organizations. I'm taking a quick look at some of the participants. I see a few consultants that are out there as well. We've all been at organizations where they say, well, our company's unique. Our processes are unique.
Right. Right.
Well, I kind of harken back. Matt, do you remember those demotivators? We had successories back in the day, and then we had this called despair, right? And one of them popped up in my head as I was thinking through it. It said, just because you're necessary doesn't mean you're important. And it's kind of true. Just because it's unique doesn't make it valuable. Don't confuse unique with strategic. You need to think through, what is your secret sauce? And of all the products that you have out there that your system needs, like, I'm fairly certain you're not buying your Gmail, your Google, not Google, you're not your mail system. You're purchasing that. It's a Microsoft product, it's a Google product, that kind of thing. It's not strategic, it's operational. So you need to think through what's strategic, and it's probably less than 20% of all of your technology needs.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the other thing that happens a lot of times is businesses think that their process is unique. They also think that they'll misinterpret their process as a strategic value add because it's complex, or a strategic asset because it's complex. So that makes me think about a colleague of ours who likes to say, rules before tools. And I think we've probably all used a version of that thought process in our careers. And that we really need to understand our processes. Businesses need to understand those first and determine if there is truly a strategic value embedded in your process. And oftentimes it isn't. It just feels strategic and unique, like you were just saying, because it's grown up over so much time. It's so core to the business. And so the lesson there is to really understand and evaluate formally whether or not your process is strategic. In fact, you could have a strategic process. It could be a strategic advantage or a differentiator if it helps you get to market more quickly. But a lot of times that's misinterpreted. So I think the message there is to do some formal evaluation, involve people in your organization around determining that strategic value. And that strategic value should be one input, one of the most critical inputs into a more formal process of evaluating this build versus buy decision.
So, again, this is one of those easy hand waving things, right? It's strategic versus it's operational or unique. What's run the business versus what is something that is a business driver.
Right.
And how do we who decides that? Like, how do we
Right.
figure out who's actually involved in that decision? Because that is actually even before anybody loads up their weighted scorecard template or anything like that and start, evaluating the market. Who's the one?
Right.
Who people actually figuring this out?
So I think it needs to be more than an IT decision. So you need to involve the C-level folks in your organization to determine what is strategic and what is not, right? That hopefully it's something, a conversation you've already had a discussion about, right? Or a concept you've already discussed, and that you kind of understand that. What are the key strategic values, drivers for your business? And how does this capability that you're evaluating whether to build or buy fit into that process? So I think the question then becomes, okay, let's say we've gone through this process and we know, okay, this is a strategic thing. So Brian, does that automatically mean that we should build it because it's strategic and it's maybe so important? Should we just always build in that case?
Right. So we've learned that it's not necessarily a default buy. You have to first ask whether it's strategic or not. And through the entire conversation, we were implying across the board that if it is strategic, you buy or you build. And I'm saying just because that's not necessarily true. If it is not strategic, you should lean towards buying. If it is strategic, we got more work to do, right? So if it's strategic and you found a product that does exactly what you do and everything that you do, like, well, then actually, I'll be honest with you, what you've got is probably not a differentiator. You probably don't have a strategic thing on, in the business, but it does not, just because something has been defined as a differentiator doesn't mean that we are done, build a product and move forward. We've just got to roll up our sleeves a little bit more. We need to think through, maybe there are components that we can purchase. We are in a world where nobody's buying servers anymore and putting them on that. Well, I won't say nobody. I'm sure somebody is going to tell me that somebody's still doing that. But largely, you are purchasing services for something. It's a platform as a service. You just said this, that earlier on, Matt. It might be a suite of products that are provided on that platform, all those add-on services, and for AWS or Azure. Maybe there are pieces of these builds or pieces of this build out that you can still purchase and still focus your costs and your time on building the right thing, honing in on it.
Right, right. So I think that leads us to, okay, it's not clear cut. It's almost never clear cut, right? But just because something is strategic, we're not necessarily going to build it. So if we're still in that situation, I think the main thing when we find ourselves there, there's a lot of tools out there that you can use to evaluate this decision, right? You can go online right now and find, 3 different methods to approaching it. And they all contain basically the same kinds of levers that you want to be looking at. Strategic value should be one of them. And have you properly evaluated that? Availability of resources, availability of a packaged product that might do this, cost, time to market. All of these things are pretty much the fundamentals of making a choice, right? The trade-offs, the pros and cons between all of those different things. My advice today is pick one process for evaluating this. Don't just give this a hand waving when you find yourself in this situation. There are formal methods for evaluating the build versus buy decision. And so we're not going to repeat all of those to you in any detail right now today. What we would like to point out is some of the pitfalls that you might run into as you're using some of those tools, especially around some of the hidden costs that might exist as you start to use these, right? You can determine costs, but have you determined all the different kinds of hidden costs that you might incur in either side of the decision? So Brian, maybe you could talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah. Pitfalls are, this is good because as you said, there are plenty of standard processes and templates and tools that are available to do build versus buy. So for anybody joining in, hoping to see the latest spreadsheet from Brian, I don't have one. I can make one if anybody
We have
would
lots
like.
of them.
Yeah, there's actually several that might be available. If always available to send that off to you, would love to do that. But the point being, those are commodities. Those are things that you can just pick up and run with. But these pitfalls, they're often in there. They're actually defined in a lot of these processes, right? These items that we're going to be bringing up. The problem is they're kind of hand wave it. So I'm going to give you an example. I'm going to give you an example of conversion costs. This is the one, and I'm going to speak again as a longtime consultant, seeing this happen over and over again. The dismissiveness of how much effort it takes to convert from one system to another system. It's always in there within within your build versus buy strategy. And it's actually important on both the build and the buy side. But particularly on the buy side, you're particularly constrained by the product. You have to think about how you are going to convert your data. And well, to be honest, 80% of that is always a point and click. It's relatively simple. All right, great, 80%. Well, most of the places I've been at, 80% doesn't cut it, right? So you got a lot of work to get to that the last 20%, and actually you could probably get 15 or so percent more with a fair amount of work systematically transferred, right? These are these old type 2 and type 3 models where, you have to track history of data or that kind of thing. Data changes over time. They're complicated and you have to keep track of it. And that just suddenly doubled the cost of your conversion. And you're still sitting with 5% of your records sitting off to the side and some regulatory requirements that tells you you cannot lose everything, and you have to figure out what do you do with that. And I have been in organizations where they just say, well, we'll just rekey it. We'll rekey it, or we'll enter it manually, or anything, just because the amount of effort required to systematically deal with that is overwhelming. And I've seen over and over again in these weighted scorecards, the conversion cost is just like, oh, consider a conversion. Just take a look at it. That's the hand wave. Be very aware. Yeah.
I think the other thing that happens in that when you're talking about conversion costs, really probably any one of these hidden costs, is that they'll consider it, you got to do that either way. So they kind of set it on the side and say, well, that's outside the scope of this analysis because you got to do a conversion either way. So we're just going to say it's even. That's not always true either. I mean, some of these software, if you buy software as a service or a package, even if you put it on premise, they might have mechanisms to help you digest. If you build it yourself, you might have to build those mechanisms. So it really does matter, and it does bear more analysis for conversion costs. But just in the interest of time, let's mention another one. One of my favorites in this category is adoption and change management. And this is, again, one of those that a lot of times in these models, they'll say, well, you got to adopt the software either way. It's new software. So you got to train your people and you got to do learning and all that good stuff. But it does matter. It can matter from a culture perspective. You're talking about change management for people. People are unpredictable. People are emotional. And so you need to make sure that whether you build it or buy it, you are properly assessing what it will take to adopt it. If you buy something, I've seen groups of people who are, anti certain sets of software, right? Certain vendors. They hate this vendor, they love that vendor, right? They like this tool, they hate that tool. So anything associated with it becomes automatically a negative if you buy a product from that vendor. Or if you build it, some people will say, well, that's awesome. Yeah, I can get immediate access, I can get immediate change, and you might be setting a terrible precedent for people getting immediate gratification of changes and change management or fixes, when really you should set a process that doesn't allow for that. But now you've created an expectation. So how do you manage that expectation and consider that cost in your decision? So the point is don't discount it. Don't set it aside because it's something you got to do whether you build or buy. It will matter depending on whether you build or buy.
Yeah, and right along that adoption change management, Matt, as you're talking through it. If you decide to purchase, if you decide to buy a product, I've definitely been in an engagement where the vendor said, we will take care of everything. We'll take care of the conversion, the maintenance. I'll give you a solid maintenance plan, which we'll talk about that in a second. We'll talk about all the implementations and the configurations. Oh, and we will actually also handle all the change management, the adoption fees, activities. Don't delegate that activity to the vendor. Don't believe them. They're salespeople. They're really good at convincing you it's really good. Don't believe it. You have to continue to own that. Now, they can still be side by side with you. They're absolutely a valuable resource. But the implementation of this is on your head. You have to own it. And the owning it is rarely, I would say, a problem of technical implementation. It is rarely, it's almost always related to acceptance, organizational acceptance. So learning how to getting people involved early, identifying champions, get them involved through the configuration processes. When you do something, whether it's a build or a buy, you're almost certainly changing processes, right? Don't change it on them. Have them walk through with you what those changes are. That's all about adoption and change management. It's throughout the execution as well as the delivery.
Yep. So another category is maintenance costs overall. And this one, maintenance costs and opportunity costs are also things that people get as a concept, right? Well, if I go build this, I can't go build that, so properly assessing the priority of your portfolio and helping that to drive your decision. Well, I don't want to build it, so I'll go buy it so that I can have my developers building something else. I would just say spend more time on that. We don't have a lot of time to go into all the back and forth on that one, but I would say don't discount opportunity cost. Don't discount maintenance costs. They are often much, much larger than you would expect. And again, they are going to be different for a purchased application than from a home built application. And so, typically people are estimating 10 to 20%, and in fact, a vendor will often charge a licensing fee because they say, 20% for support, et cetera. My experience is it's closer to 40%, sometimes 50%. Either way, I mean, it could be your homegrown applications could cost that much in terms of maintenance, or the vendor application could cost that much. And then you got to consider the data underneath it and managing the data underneath it and how all that flows. And that's typically a huge aspect of the maintenance cost.
Yeah, that absolutely is true. That 40 to 50% is true, especially in the first couple of years of implementing, right? Because, well, we are very well aware as IT experts that we're really not good as a human species in knowing what we want, but we're pretty good at knowing what we don't want when we see it. And so you often need to make some of the fast-moving enhancements over time. And, well, that typically gets thrown under enhancement or under the maintenance mode.
Right.
So something when I've been involved with implementations of anything, whether it's a build or a buy, we talk about what happens if we change? What if we possibly, I remember back in the early 2000s, like we have to make sure all of our SQL is not Oracle based or SQL based, because what if we decide to change from Oracle to SQL Server? And I can tell you that never happened. Like we've a whole lot of work involved on paying attention to not using Transact SQL or that kind of thing in order to ensure that it is can be adopted from one system to the next system, and it almost never happened. We're in a different world. We're in a different era right now where the number, the breadth and depth of products available and how fast they are evolving is significant. And you need to think through where your data is. How can you get access to your data? How do you own? What does own your data even mean? You got to think through what's the shelf life of not just the product, but the vendor. right? And when you're implementing something that in an organization that looks fantastic and is excited about being in the third round of funding, is 3 years old, are you ready to put your organization's lifeline on there? You might. Make sure you know how to get your data out, and that's not easy all the time.
Right.
Right. It's a variation of the conversion costs.
Yeah, I think the good news is that, you know, everybody's much more aware of this these days, and the software as a service vendors, you know, I think all of us as we build cloud solutions understand, you know, that data repository design issue much earlier on, and it's becoming, you know, much more loosely coupled from everything else and able to be transferred. But there still are switching costs there, no matter which way you go. But they are different depending on which way you go. So again, it's one of those hidden costs, pitfalls that, you know, they just hand wave it away into something that can be considered later.
Actually, before you get
Go ahead.
the next up, you hit me on, as we think through like the switching cost, there is no such thing as buy it for life, right? Everything has a lifespan
Right.
to it. And it just kind of hit me, and I quickly looked it up. I don't know if you remember, Jamie Fike, one of our Ingage consultants, wrote a blog post called Future Perspectives. And I think it was it looks like February 2021. And he wrote about it in relation to encouraging an agile team to peer into the future and describe what the successful end state is at the end of their sprint, right? And it's a kind of a visualization activity, and it feels a little ethereal and weird, but it actually works. I think this is a good thing to do for any implementation as well, right? Peer into the future. Think through, what does it look like at the end of this solution's life? What does transition look like? And that will drive right into how do I get my data out? How do I move things forward? What does my process look like?
Absolutely. And there's so many places where we do that in our lives. Do we do it enough? You know, like when you take a new job, right? A lot of times, if you're being smart about it, you understand what the exit strategy is. How am I going to transition? What's available to help me do that if I were to choose to do that in the future? And so this is no different. You just want to make sure that you understand. In fact, I think it's more possible, more prevalent that you might buy something. Maybe you even buy something. Your strategy is, I do want to build this, but I'm going to buy something that does 80% of it for a few years, and then and be building while I use that 80% capability, and then implement my own homegrown solution. You know, there are strategies in between there, and I think a lot of the software as a service capabilities out there may give us opportunities to do that. So there's just so many more options. I call that the buy and get by strategy, right? You're just going to get by for a little while and then buy or build something better. But you have the ability to do that because you're not so locked in on these solutions these days. When you do purchase something, you have the ability to switch. You're in a subscription instead of a 5-year contract. And so it's another variation of this whole decision that you can be thinking about. What horizon is the right horizon? How dynamic is your business, right? How much change do you expect to see? I mean, maybe you need something for the next couple of years. So it's okay to buy and get by for a while, while you continue to look forward. As long as you've got that future-oriented view, I think that can be a smart strategy.
Yeah, and that really a big driver around that is how dynamic both the technology environment is, as well as how dynamic your business process is that you're trying to implement, right? You might be willing and actually have to take ownership of having to throw something out and start all over again. Just know that that end of life is going to happen sooner because things are changing so quickly. So we've hit a lot. We've hit a lot in a very short period of time. I have no idea if anybody on in this live stream is expecting what, you know, they were expecting some sort of amazing PowerPoint. We don't have one. As you can see, you just get to look at our lovely faces. And I'd love to learn more if people were interested in this. But before we get to that, I just do a quick wrap up. Right. We want to first start off with something you talked about earlier on. The people are critical, right? The people who is involved in this decision, make sure you identify who they are, make sure they're informed, make sure they're bought in as part of the process, the adoption process. Think about both the people, internal stakeholders and your external stakeholders. What else? Know your strategy. Know your strategy and the role that it plays in this decision. Do not confuse strategy with uniqueness. They may be or may not be the same thing. Pick an approach. Pick an assessment, a build versus buy assessment approach, and follow it. Do not wing it. Guarantee you're going to find an extraordinarily enthusiastic business development person, and he's going to tell you that it solves every problem, and you will have forgotten 2 problems without this process. Think about those pitfalls. Think about what's important to you, your organization, and your team. Think about what those hidden costs are, the adoption change management, the switching costs, and then, as we said towards the end, future-proof everything. Think about what your time horizon is. What does it look like at the end? If you think about it now, you'll be in a much better state for you or your successor if you're not in that position, because you implemented an amazing system. You're prepared. You're prepared for it. Involve the right people. We talked about the people up front. Talk about the people at the end. If any of this sounds overwhelming or intriguing, connect with the experts. You're always going to have the vendor let you know that everything's all right, or you're going to you're working with your team, your internal team, and they're overwhelmed and have an analysis paralysis. Connect up with some experts, some people who have been around the block a little bit and have seen, when they know a few things because they've seen a few things. Like us, just as an idea. But yeah, I mean, at the end, this is not something to take lightly, and we see it taken lightly in the past. The dynamic environment of where we're in today requires you to do a lot of upfront thinking. Am I missing